Okay, let's get into this. It's an incredible story of really global ambition, intense secrecy, and a technological surprise that basically changed everything. Education, politics, technology, all of it.
We're diving into the space race.
And it's so important to understand this wasn't just, a friendly competition to see who could build a cooler
Yeah,
rocket.
no, not at all. This really started right after World War II. The two biggest winners, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, they stopped being allies and became these bitter rivals.
And that rivalry is what we now call the Cold War. They had completely different ideas about how a country should run, and they wanted to prove to the whole world that their system was better.
Exactly. But instead of fighting with tanks and bombs directly, they fought with science, with technology and engineering.
The stakes were just impossibly high.
Right, because both nations figured out very quickly that controlling the sky and eventually space gave you this massive military advantage. I mean, an unthinkable advantage.
If you could put something up there, you could spy on anyone. You could threaten any spot on the map.
And to get there, they hired the absolute best minds they could find. A lot of these were the same scientists and engineers who had just spent years building weapons for the war.
They were given basically limitless resources and just one goal: build the biggest, most powerful rockets anyone had ever seen.
So the world knew this race was happening, but nobody, and I mean nobody, was prepared for October 4th, 1957.
That's when the Soviet Union just blindsided the entire planet. They secretly launched Sputnik 1 into orbit.
The very first man-made object to ever circle the Earth. It's hard to overstate how big of a shock that was.
And Sputnik, it means fellow traveler in Russian, was tiny. It was barely the size of a beach ball. This polished metal sphere weighed about 184 pounds.
But the size didn't matter.
Yeah.
The fact that the Soviets had the power to get it up there, that proved their technology was far, far more advanced than anyone in the West believed.
And then there was the sound. The sound became the proof.
Oh yeah. Once it was in orbit, the satellite didn't send back complex data. It just sent out a simple, rhythmic electronic beep.
A beep. And that beeping was crucial. People all over the world could tune their radios to the right frequency and just hear it.
And that noise confirmed it. The Soviet Union was flying directly over their countries, including the United States, dozens of times a day.
It was this amazing moment for humanity, but also, a terrifying announcement of Soviet power.
That intense fear is what kicked off the Sputnik Shock in the United States.
Right. The thinking was, if they can put a tiny satellite into orbit,
Then they could probably launch a nuclear weapon from space onto any city they wanted.
the fear was palpable. The night sky suddenly felt less like a source of wonder and more like this new vulnerable war front.
If you look at the newspapers from that week, the headlines are huge. They're practically screaming about the red moon.
So this forced the U.S. government to face a really harsh reality. They were behind, they were lagging in science and tech.
And they realized the only way to catch up wasn't just to build one better rocket. They had to fundamentally change how they train the next generation.
So they poured a massive amount of money and resources into schools all across the country. This wasn't just a small upgrade, it was a total shift.
Yeah, we needed thousands of rocket scientists and computer programmers, and we needed them fast.
So the focus went straight to science and math programs.
You saw things like new math curricula showing up, designed to push students into advanced physics and calculus way earlier, the exact skills you need for, rocketry.
It completely changed what high school was about. Students were really encouraged, almost pressured, to go into technical careers.
And even things like foreign language classes suddenly became a huge deal.
Why is that?
So American experts could read international research papers, so they wouldn't miss a single breakthrough from anywhere else in the world.
It was a national effort, and it started right there in the classroom.
But you can't run a space program from a high school chem lab. You need a real structure.
Exactly. Education was step one. But where do all these new scientists go? Before 1958, the U.S. space effort was kind of a chaotic mess.
Oh, it was. You had the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, all trying to build their own separate rocket.
Wasting time and money.
A lot of time and money. And President Eisenhower saw that this just wasn't going to work against the Soviet system, which was very centralized. He wanted one single civilian agency.
To lead the peaceful exploration of space and just streamline the whole thing.
And that's how we got NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, formed in 1958.
NASA was immediately given a huge budget. It was tasked with gathering the best minds in the country, designing spacecraft, and training the first American astronauts.
It was a clear statement. We are serious about winning this.
But even with all that, the U.S. had a really, really rocky start.
Painfully rocky. They were scrambling to just launch a satellite, any satellite, to prove they could do it.
And that attempt came in December 1957. They decided to launch their Vanguard rocket.
And in a move that seems unbelievable today, they broadcast it live on TV. Millions of people were watching.
And it was an immediate, stunning disaster.
I mean, the rocket ignited, it rose maybe 4 feet off the launch pad, and then it just stalled
Yeah.
and exploded.
A giant fireball right there on camera for everyone to see.
That failure became a global joke. The media was brutal. They gave it nicknames like Flapnik or Stay Putnik.
It just drove home how incredibly complex this technology was, how one tiny flaw in a fuel line could lead to a massive failure.
That public humiliation, though, it forced American engineers to work even harder. They had to be perfect.
And they finally got it right a few weeks later, January 31st, 1958. They used a different rocket system to launch Explorer 1.
Explorer 1 worked,
Yeah.
but it was smaller than Sputnik. The revolutionary part wasn't its size, it was what it carried inside.
Right. It had these crucial scientific instruments designed by a scientist named James Van Allen.
And what Explorer 1 found was a huge scientific breakthrough, something the Soviets had completely missed in their rush to just get to space first.
It identified this massive zone of high-energy radiation that's trapped by Earth's magnetic field.
Today we call it the Van Allen radiation belt. You can think of it like a giant, invisible, highly charged donut protecting the Earth.
Discovering that proved the U.S. could not only compete, but could make these fundamental, world-changing discoveries. That success restored a lot of lost pride.
It did. But even with these satellites, there was still a huge question hanging over both countries.
Could a human survive the trip?
Exactly. Before you launch a person, you need data. How do living things handle weightlessness? The G-forces, the radiation.
And that meant sending animals into orbit. It was dangerous, often fatal work.
The Soviet Union went first. They sent a dog named Laika aboard Sputnik 2. She was a pioneer, really. She gave them the first data on how a complex mammal reacts to space.
And the U.S. followed, but they used monkeys and chimpanzees in their early tests.
Right. These animals were strapped into capsules, they endured the launch, and they provided that essential physiological data.
Data on heart rate, breathing, things that showed what life support systems were needed before you could safely send a person.
The sacrifice those animal pioneers made was just key. The data they provided absolutely paved the way for human spaceflight.
Which brings us to the next phase of the competition.
And that phase hit its turning point in April 1961. The Soviet Union, once again, clinched the major symbolic victory.
A 27-year-old Soviet pilot, Yuri Gagarin, became the first person in history to orbit the entire planet.
He was in his Vostok 1 capsule for about 108 minutes. He circled the globe, and he proved that humanity could survive that leap into space.
For the Soviets, this was it, the ultimate victory. They beat the U.S. to the first satellite, and now they'd beaten them to the first man in orbit.
And once again, the U.S. was playing catch-up. A few weeks later, Alan Shepard made a shorter flight. It was suborbital.
So he went into space and came back down, but didn't actually orbit the planet.
Right. It proved the U.S. was close, but still very clearly in second place.
And this intense rivalry, this embarrassment, it forced the U.S. to make a really bold move. It wasn't enough to just follow the Soviets anymore.
They needed a new goal, something so massive, so technologically demanding, it would refocus the entire nation.
And that's when President John F. Kennedy made his famous declaration to Congress in 1961.
He challenged the nation to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the end of the decade, before 1970.
I mean, just think about the audacity of that. The moon is 238,000 miles away.
At the time, they hadn't even reliably figured out orbital mechanics, and he's calling for a round trip to another celestial body.
To meet that deadline, NASA had to invent, well, basically everything from scratch.
Entirely new materials that could handle the heat of reentry, tiny microcomputers that could fit in a capsule, and the biggest rockets ever designed, like the Saturn V.
It became the most complex and expensive non-military scientific project in history.
But by setting that almost impossible goal, Kennedy gave every engineer, every scientist, a single unified mission. The whole country was focused on that distant gray rock.
And while the space race began as this tense military rivalry, the legacy, it goes so far beyond flags and politics.
It really does. Ultimately, it pushed human innovation forward for everyone.
It's incredible how much of our modern life comes directly from that push in the 1960s. Take satellite tech, for instance.
Yeah, because we had to learn how to put things into a stable orbit. We can now use communication satellites to bounce signals across the globe.
That's why your phone call, your video stream, gets across continents in an instant.
And think about GPS, the Global Positioning System. That whole technology relies on a network of satellites. The systems built to navigate spacecraft were adapted so that now you can find your location anywhere on the planet with your phone.
Weather satellites, too, so crucial for predicting storms, saving lives. That's a direct outcome of this era.
Even on a smaller scale. The focus on lightweight, durable materials and efficient food storage for astronauts led to things we use every day.
Like what?
Mylar blankets, freeze-dried foods, all that comes from the race to the moon.
Today, that competition has really transformed into collaboration. You see countries working together on the International Space Station, continuing the exploration that was kick-started by that frantic beeping sound from Sputnik.
The space race pushed two powerful nations to their absolute technological limits. And the result was these incredible scientific leaps that still define how you live, how you communicate, and how you navigate your world today.
But if landing on the moon required building the largest machine in history, what kind of impossible machine do you think it will take for the next generation to get to Mars?
Good luck with your studies.